Good morning, everybody. I'm going to mute yours. We are just about to get started. A couple housekeeping duties. There's a question and answer box. Andy already submitted one question and we answered that. If you have questions throughout the presentation, just submit them there and we will answer them at the end. And this is, let me go to the next slide. We'll show this at the end too for CCA credits and RUP credits. If you want to take this information down and get credits for this meeting. We've got 100 people on.
That's a pretty good turnout.
I mean, I think it's gonna, I'm hoping that we are close to 200.
Good morning, everybody. Corey is having a little trouble getting connected to the internet this morning, but we'll be starting shortly. The program for today is going to be Corey's going to kick off giving us a review of last year, talking about crop records, going to some nutritional products, and then I'll hop in after him. I'll give an update on Leafspot control programs for 2021 and fungicides. Then Daniel will be presenting his sugar beet advancement research trials, his agronomy trials that he did this past year. And then I'll come back on after Daniel and conclude with talking about herbicide resistant weeds, some potential new herbicide labels that may get approved before spring to help us battle palmer and water hemp, but we'll be starting here shortly.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our 2021 agronomy meetings. Excited to be with you here virtually today. Can't wait till we can start doing meetings back in person. So, but we'll do the best we can here with our virtual meeting, and I think we got a lot of great information for you today. So again, thanks for attending and great to have you here. Okay, so on our program today, we're going to do a quick review of 2020, kind of what happened with the crop and some things that happened there that influenced our season. I'll go over a quick crop records review. So it's always fun to go over how how crop records went for our 2021 season. I got some data on sugar variability that I think is very interesting, and I think kind of plays into some things we've been learning more and more about sugar and its variability within fields. And so I think that's something that is good to explore, and I think it's an opportunity for us for the future. Also, I'm going to go over some crop nutrients. So we've got some interesting things we've been learning about nutrient interactions. So I kind of talked about that last year. This year, I think we've got some things to back that up even more. So really excited to share that with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about some Rhizoctonia fungicides, some new things that are on the market this year and some things changing. So I'll give you an update on that. Also talk about Leafspot management, so review some of the strategies, especially with the new CR Plus varieties and what that means. Daniel's got some exciting data on the sugar beet advancement strip trials to share with you, and that's going to be exciting to see. And then also we're going to finish up with some weed resistance and weed management strategies. That's, obviously becoming a bigger deal for everybody as we get more resistant weed species. So we'll have some things there that we can share with you and give you some thoughts on that and some label things that'll hopefully happen this year. Okay, so first of all, going back to 2020, if we remember back, we were pretty excited to get some beets planted in March, and are really excited where those beets might go for the future. Unfortunately, a lot of those we lost due to freeze. So we did wind up replanting quite a few acres this year, more than in a long time, 20%. However, even with that replanting going on, we did get a lot of beets planted early. So, I mean, that was, even though we lost some of those March beets, the conditions were still good to replant some of those, in the early to late April timeframe. So that gave those beets an opportunity to be, quite successful. We did have those challenges with the heavy rains, and flooding, and that caused a lot of issues, especially in the north and the west. We had a lot of seedling disease and challenges in some of those fields that hurt us. And then we were really wet early last year. So leaf spot was we were really nervous that we were going to have a lot of leaf spot due to this this heavy rainfall we were seeing early in the season. We thought this could be a real challenging leaf spot year. The weather, I'd say, was quite variable when you look at that. So we started out real wet in some cases, and then, especially the east really dried out. So that really took the top end yield off of some of the East District, growers. So that was a real challenge for them with that drought. And so their yields were not as good as expected or as they'd like to see. We had the cooler, drier fall, though. I think that was really a big story for us from our sugar content point of view. So really, an ideal year for sugar content increases late in the season. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So this set of data here is the blue bars are rainfall amounts. So if you look at the blue bars, that shows you rainfall amounts in inches each day that it rained. And then the red line indicates the average daily temperature for the day. So one thing you'll see here is, actually the summer was quite warm. So I think we generally look at this year, well, it was a cool year. But the summer actually was quite warm, about average that way. It was just the fall was really cool. So, early September, right around Labor Day, it got cold and it stayed cold all the way through the season. And I think that was great for sugar content and increasing sugar. If you look at the rainfall, we had that heavy rainfall early. Then it sort of moderated out and in some cases was not good enough. But, the rainfall kind of came a little more average or a little more predictable pattern. So a lot of times we'll see a lot of rain right before harvest. And so that tends to, worried about nitrogen use and beet maybe more growth versus sugar. So it really was a good balance from a sugar content standpoint this year. And so we had some real nice increases in sugar. I just want to talk a little bit about crop records. So again, there are crop records growers you can access yourself if you want to take a look at it. It's in our member website under the agricultural tab. So you can click on agriculture, and then we have reports here. So you've got the reports where you can look at some different crop records, as well as we have links to, the research information, reach data, and news beats and things like that. So that's all in that agricultural tab, just as a reminder, and you can look at some crop records yourself as well. We also post our data in the website. We'll have the book. So the book will be coming out shortly. MSU had some challenges. One of the researchers had a person leave, and they're just trying to wrap up some data. We're hoping to get that all done here the end of this week yet. The data for the most part's done. And so we're just waiting on that one person to get us their data, and then we'll start publishing and send out the data. And so you can look and review all the data that we have here today. But we also have it, and we're adding it to this spot in the website where you can look at the different trials over different years, and we have that available as well. Okay, so to get into some crop records data for this year, first slide I'm going to show you is on row spacing. So we have about an even split between 22 and 20-inch rows and 28 and 30-inch rows in terms of acres. So it's about, when you add the two, say wide versus narrow, it's about even. We did see a bit of a gain though in the 22 and 20-inch rows in 2020 versus 2019 compared to the 28s and 30s. So the 22 and 20s were up 7,000 acres, and the 28 and 30-inch rows were up 2,000. So as we went to the 100% plant or the authorization, that resulted in about 9,000 more acres or so that were there to plant. And, the 20s and 22-inch rows planted 7,000 of those additional acres. Look at yield, tons per acre in terms of row spacing. Narrow rows were the winner this year. They had the highest average yield in both the 22 and 20s versus the 28 and 30s. So what was interesting too, kind of comparing, I looked back at 2019 as I was putting together compared to 2020, tons were actually quite stable in the 20 and 28 rows, meaning the yield averages were about the same between 2019 and 2020. However, the 30-inch rows, we did see a decrease by about a half a ton per acre in 2020 versus 2019. In terms of sugar per ton, we see similar trends. So sugar per ton between 22, 20, and 28-inch rows was about the same. 30-inch rows was our lowest. We did see an increase by about 3 pounds per ton in the 22, 20, and 28-inch rows in 2020 compared to 2019. 30-inch rows, it was exactly the same. So I did see some trends in the improvement in the 28 through 20-inch rows. One of my favorite slides is really looking at this previous crop information. So this is really neat to me to watch. Wheat and corn continue to be our biggest previous crop acres. Corn actually gained the most again out of that additional 9,000 acres. Corn, most of that additional acreage came following corn. Soybeans is number 3, then dry beans, alfalfa, cucumbers, and other. When you start breaking down the yield by previous crop, I think this gets quite interesting. And Daniel will have some interesting cover crop information to share with you that backs up this data. We have our wheat and oilseed radish. So kind of looking at wheat and breaking wheat down in those acres. There's wheat cover systems that growers use on a regular basis. And you look at wheat, oilseed radish, those are our number 1 in terms of tons per acre. And especially when you compare that to wheat with no cover, right? So the cover crop systems are definitely bringing some value there. Dry beans, I thought this is interesting. So now a couple years in a row, our dry bean yields, both 2019 and 2020, have been really good. So when you say beets following dry beans, so I think growers are doing a great job of managing your herbicide rotations, some of those things in dry beans can be a challenge with sugar beets. So you guys are doing a real good job with that, and it's showing in our our overall yields. You got alfalfas right up there too, corn, cucumbers, and soybeans are last. Again, this is a trend that we see, kind of year in and year out. Soybeans seem to be a challenge, and there's multiple reasons why soybeans can be a challenge. When you're planting beets after soybeans, I think rhizoctonia and root disease is probably the biggest, and that's something that especially if you're following soybeans, making sure you're using good disease management strategies to try to do the best you can with that situation. Looking at sugar per ton, again, dry beans did really well at our highest sugar per ton, followed by the wheat cover systems and wheat. So they're all about the same in RWST, cucumbers, corn. Soybeans are close on RWST, just a little lower. Alfalfa really dropped off. So alfalfa is one that we did, again, I think you look at manure management and nitrogen release and all that. And I'll talk a little bit more about nitrogen and some things there. So, that's something, again, to watch out for if you're struggling with sugars after alfalfa, and maybe we can come up with some strategies there to help you out with that. The other, I'm not really sure what other is exactly. I know hemp's one. We did include hemp as a rotation crop this year, but not many included that one. But there was quite a bit of other, and maybe hemp was one of those that we looked at as a rotation crop. Next, I want to talk a little bit about quality sample amino nitrogen. So, this is one I like to watch, and it seems like amino nitrogen follows RWST. They both follow real closely there. So as you look at our trends, amino nitrogen's bounced around over the years as we look at that. 2016 was really high, 2017 we were low, 2018 it was higher. The last 2 years, amino nitrogen has been kind of below this trend line. And so in 2020, it's very low. So I think that was kind of interesting to see. And if you look at, in 2018, we were talking about higher aminos, RWST being down, we're kind of wondering, hey, is nitrogen use poor? And I think it comes back to some of these climate things, how we apply nitrogen and manage that. And I've got some things to share with you here that kind of feed into this thought. 2019, our aminos were back to 2017 levels, and our sugar per ton was up. So that was nice to see. So we're kind of, the question was, well, was our end use better in 2019? And we're still looking at ways to optimize end use and stress environments. So I think when you deal with weather stress, right, there's not really a great, way if we don't get rain, unless you have irrigation, you can't make it rain. But that's something that, can we cushion against those stresses? It seems like we have that stress every year in some way or another. When we look at our pre-harvest samples, 2019 was our lowest tonnage for a pre-harvest sample when we took those. And when we looked at our average yield at the end of the year, it was our second highest gain. So we saw a real big gain in tonnage in 2019. When you look at sugar in 2019, it was our highest pre-harvest sample early. So we came in really high, but it was our third lowest gain. So we didn't see the big gain like we did this year. Looking at 2020, our aminos were the lowest in recent history, and our RWST was about the same, between the 2 years overall on average. Our end use was better in 2019 and 2020. I think so. We're starting to see some of these trends where maybe, this nitrogen use, weather plays a factor, but, managing that's very important to maximizing your opportunity. 2020, we had an average tonnage for our pre-harvest samples at the end, and we just had a slightly below average gain. We looked at our tonnage versus where we ended up at. But in our 2020 pre-harvest sugars compared to our end of year sugars, this was our second highest gain overall. So we had a huge gain in sugar this year, which was really exciting to see. And you've seen this chart a few times. Elizabeth put this chart together, and kind of shows the gains that we've seen, that trend line, that orange line's right around that mid-September mark. And we had a lot of sugar gain from mid to early September on, and that really helped make the crop. So it was kind of interesting to see, and would like to see those types of trends be able to continue. So if you look at grower yields in 2020, during regular delivery, we averaged 30 plus tons per acre, nearly 300 RWST. And so we had multiple growers achieved that 3,300 goal, which was pretty exciting. So I think when going into this year, that goal seemed further away than what it does now, in general. And so I think that was really, really exciting to see that happen and see see those things occur, and would like to, work towards that to keep that going. And even when you look at weather, which we're always going to have weather extremes, we might even had a little better year. I mean, obviously the challenges with the flooding, and that really hurt that crop. And then obviously the dry weather in the east, I mean, that really took a lot off our yields. So, if we could have avoided some of that, I think we'd have been a lot better shape overall, for sure. So it'd be great to repeat, this gain we saw in 2021 without some of those challenges that we faced. So RWST is really the focus for 2021. A lot of things you'll see here today are kind of focused around that. We got to have these management practices in place. We got to manage leaf spot and weeds to have that opportunity to get to where we want to get. But really, again, Michigan Sugar's got this strategy, and I think it's a great strategy. It's profitable for the company and the growers to get this 9,000 pound of sugar per acre average, based on a 30 ton per acre average and 300 RWST, which is about 19 to 20% sugar. So if we can achieve that, that's going to be a very good situation for growers and Michigan Sugar as a whole. But to achieve this, we need to focus on variety selection, which I think you've already done. I mean, based on some of the reports I've got back, I think growers have really, looking at sugar per ton, and that's important from a variety standpoint. And that's really the first place to start, is getting varieties that have that genetic potential to have the sugar that we need. And then really we need to, get the production practices in place to help realize that, that situation. So I want to talk about, we've been doing some projects in Ontario here for a while, looking at sugar variability. And so Tom Chick Ag's been working with us and doing a great job with this and helping us out there. And, so we looked at the sugar variability again, and we kind of want to keep taking this project to higher levels. So one of the things we did in 2020, again, we took a field, this is about a 53 acre field. And we looked at sugars, kind of geospecifically throughout the field. So they took core samples and we looked at sugar content in different areas. And what we found is we did see some variability. So if you look at this, if you drove by this field, you'd say, this is a perfectly even field. You'd say it looks green across the top. Visually walking through it, you'd say there should be no differences. This is a very uniform field. Yet, what we did see is some variability in some of these sugars. So you can see we had a, high, almost 20.5 and a low of about 18.5 to 19. And so, I've shown this to you before. We've seen these last year and we've looked at it. But one of the things we want to dive into a little bit, try to start teasing apart the whys. Maybe why are we seeing this even in a field that you'd say is very uniform, right? Well, the first thing you think about is, well, nitrogen availability, right? Or, that's definitely an influence. If the soil type's about the same, you should see differences in nitrogen availability. Well, so one of the things we looked at was organic matter. And we said, okay, we took soil samples and looked at different things in that. And you first thought, okay, organic matter, that should make a difference, right? In sugar differences. Well, this was quite interesting. So you can see there is a difference in organic matter, and it does kind of follow the sugar trends as we look here, but it's actually opposite of what you think. So in the red and orange and yellow, that's actually low organic matter. The green is high organic matter, and that's where our sugars are the highest. So that was like, wow, okay, so there's a trend there, but it's exactly opposite of what we would think. So that's odd. So what could it be? So we looked through some of our other patterns and, tried to see if there were some things there. Well, one thing that popped out was potassium. So we looked at potassium levels in the field, and that was kind of a more interesting trend. As you could see, the higher potassium, so the green is higher potassium levels in the soil. The lighter green is lower potassium. And so we start to see this trend of, the potassium levels there seemed to be a nice trend there. So I thought that was quite interesting. And that kind of relates to some data that we looked at last year and we did this year. So our meetings last year, I talked about Kurt Steinke and MSU worked on nitrogen and we're working on nitrogen and potassium interactions, and we're trying to see how this relates, you know, to sugar and different things and tonnage. And so how that, you know, Kurt had a study in 2019, and this shows on the left axis we have RWST. On the bottom we have pounds of nitrogen. So we had 0, 80, and 160 pounds of nitrogen. The lines are potassium, or potassium, applied as potash, but this is actual K, so pounds of K per acre. Of the red lines, 300 pounds, the yellow line's 150 pounds, and the blue line is 0 pounds. And so what we see is, I find this very interesting. We were looking at this and said, well, you know, 0 and 0, you know, you get what you get. That's all kind of tighter. As we go up to 80 pounds per acre, you start to see a little separation there, although not statistically so, where, yeah, maybe there's this trend when we apply potassium with our nitrogen, we're seeing some sugar increases. But when you go to the high end rates, we saw this clear trend where sugars dropped, where we had 0 K. They didn't drop as far, where we had the 150 pounds of K. And they actually, you know, were on an upward trend a little bit when we added 300 pounds of K. So we want to repeat this, this study in 2020 and say, hey, is there something going on here between potassium and nitrogen? And especially growers are looking at, well, how do I optimize my yield? The first thing you think about is nitrogen, right? I need to have higher nitrogen rates, or I'm going to up my nitrogen to get more tonnage. But obviously, as we know, there's a trade-off between nitrogen and sugar per ton. And so this study in 2020, we looked at this same program here locally and looked at 160, 80, and 0 pounds of nitrogen, and then over the same K rates again. So again, this was actual K applied as potash, pre-plant incorporated in the spring. And so actual K was 0, 150, and 300 pounds of K2O. And so a couple of things that you see here, a couple trends, just look in general at the tons. So, you know, tonnage was higher where we have higher N. That's pretty common. That's pretty typical as we look at. So 0, 80, and 160. When we start going back to the sugar now and looking at the sugar per ton, we do see where the high N rate with no K, you know, we do see that reduction in sugar per ton. When we add the 150 and 300 pounds of K back in at that higher rate, we see the improvement in sugar per ton. And so we do see that, you know, a little bit of that too within the 80 pound rate range again, but at those higher nitrogen rates, adding that K back is very important. And so, so I think this is something, again, you know, as we're struggling with sugars and thinking about some of those things, potassium, and how, you know, our potassium applications and how we're utilizing that's going to become important. So that's something we're going to continue to study and look at. And I think there's a lot that can help us in terms of improving RWST. Okay, so next thing we looked at was nitrogen application strategies. So, you know, growers are looking at different ways to apply nitrogen and save trips across the field. So, you know, one of the big things here that we looked at was coulter versus streaming applications and see how that worked. And then also looking at split applications and kind of getting after this nitrogen management and the weather stress and, you know, how do we really apply nitrogen to maximize its use? So we looked at that same 160 pounds of nitrogen rate. We applied it as 28%. We looked at application timing. So we had broadcast pre-plant. So basically sprayed it all on pre-plant. We looked at broadcast pre-plant and then 2x2. So looking at splitting the two, then broadcast pre-plant 2x2 and side dress. So looking at those different application timings and see how that affected things. Again, we compared coulter versus streaming. We did see some minor crop injury from streaming. So, you know, Sugar Beet Advancement's done some work on this as well. So yeah, if the stream obviously hits the beets, it can cause a little bit of burn, but it doesn't seem to be, you know, detrimental to yield from what we're seeing. this site that we looked at had heavy corn stalk residue that influenced results. So again, you know, if you're looking at, you got to feel the corn stalks that you're planting your beets into this year, this is a good indication of what you might expect from some of the from some of your nitrogen applications. And I think that'd be useful to you to look at. And this is also in 22-inch rows. So that did, this was 22-inch rows versus say 28 or 30. Okay, so looking at our nitrogen application strategies, we have our, you know, different strategies here: pre-plant, then broadcast, at plant 2x2. We did 6 leaf applications with both the coulter and the streamer. And then we also did a 12 leaf stream application to see how that went. And this is RWST, tonnage, and RWSA. So one thing that you'll notice is with the broadcast, putting it on all up front at 160 pounds per acre, we didn't use a stabilizer in this to compare that. But you can see that our tonnage was not as good. So again, in these high residue situations, we may have some tie up from that single application early in the corn stalks. Now, our sugars weren't too bad, but again, you know, our tonnage was very low with that application. Comparing that to when we split it out just a little bit, we did improve our tonnage quite a bit. So I think that was, you know, that's a key thing to think about. That split was important for improving our tonnage. We went then a step further. So this next set of bars, we're looking at broadcast, 60 pounds early, and then comparing that to some 2x2 applications and then coulter applications at different rates. So one thing you'll see here is with the coulter applications, our sugars weren't bad, but in both cases, both the 60 pound and the 120 pound application, we did see reduced tonnage. And so, you know, again, I think looking at the coulter in this case, you know, or the nitrogen movement, are we getting enough nitrogen movement from that coulter to help the crop, especially in high residue situations? The streamer actually in this case was better. So you'd say, wow, that was, I think, an interesting insight where, you know, streaming it in this case actually looked better than the coulter. We also did look at some other applications there where we just looked at the ant plant and then maybe looked at some splitting the streamer application twice or just putting it on all at 12 leaf. Didn't see a big difference between those two application timings, but, you know, generally having your nitrogen on earlier is better. So to kind of summarize our nutrition information, having nitrogen and K is important for higher RWST. So I think this is a big thing to think about with your management practices, and make sure especially if you're going for higher yields at higher nitrogen rates, make sure your potassium's there. You might want to look at your sulfur as well as part of that. Splitting nitrogen applications is important to maximize efficiency. So again, we see the advantages to those splits, and you know, looking at how that can help reduce weather stress and weather risk. Streaming applications appear to be as effective as the coulter applications, particularly narrow rows. So I think this is something that, you know, to think about with the system. Again, you know, if you're going to stream, make sure you're using an above ground stabilizer to guard against volatilization loss and some of those strategies. You know, those are things to consider as well with some of this. You know, we'll continue to examine it, but I think that's the trend. I mean, you know, growers have sprayers that can get across the field quickly, and, you know, getting timely nitrogen is very important. So I think looking at the timeliness, and, you know, it seems to be an effective strategy, and we're not seeing, you know, as much injury from that. And again, you know, getting that on early is important, and timeliness to make it work. We also looked at some nutrient availability enhancing products this year. So you'll probably hear a little bit more about Leafspot. It's a West Central product. It's a EDDHA chelate. And so we've been testing this for a number of years. So Sugar Bee Advancements looked at it, Michigan Sugars looked at it. Some local agribusinesses have been doing some comparisons, and we're seeing some interesting results with it. It's really designed to help make nutrients more available. And so, you know, we've seen some interesting trends in terms of, so we kind of compared a full, you know, our check program is kind of a full 2x2 program, you could say 10-30-40 thiazole, you know, all 28%, all 2x2, so it'd be a strong 2x2 program. Then we looked at Levosol with that same 2x2 program, adding Levosol to a Quadris and Mustang. So kind of two things we found is Levosol mixes really well, and it doesn't reduce stand, you know, in the row. So it's a safe product to use, and I think that's important to note, you know, with some of these products. And so we did see some trends for improved sugar per ton. So I think that was pretty interesting with that product. We've been doing a lot of testing with, you know, kind of what we term plant health products. Some of the products are, you know, considered in-furrow fertilizers. And I think there's going to be more interest in this with, you know, Asteroid, the new formulation of azoxystrobin. And it's, you know, it's designed to be a little more compatible with liquid fertilizers. You know, I think growers are having an interest, and we are seeing some advantages in cases with, you know, running some types of products in furrow, nutrient enhancing products or plant health products, you know, like the Levosol. And so, you know, few products we tested with Helena. We worked on their Zypro and Nucleus OFOS. That product, we applied that in furrow. We saw that we did see a little sugar improvement from some of those treatments, as well as no issues with stand this year. With MTS, these were both 2x2 and foliar products. We looked at their soil carbon and LX7. We did see some improvements in sugar per ton with those products. Nature's, we did some work with them on some in-furrow and foliar programs. So we had multiple products in that mix. So when the book comes out, take a look at that. But we did see some improvements in there and no issues with stand. And with Silvar, we looked at a biological called P45, and we seem to see some help on sugar per ton with that in furrow. So again, you know, with some of these in-furrow products, just be careful what you're looking at. It's hard for us to recommend, you know, just the nature of our soils. You know, if you go to Minnesota, North Dakota, they use 1034-0 in furrow on a regular basis. Sugar Bee Advancement studied this. Michigan Sugar studied this over the years. We've seen injury with 1034-0 applied in furrow, and so we don't recommend that. We've seen injury with other products applied in furrow, and so it's difficult. You know, we're trying to test products. We're working with companies. There's a lot of good companies out there that have quality products that are doing good testing. They're working with us, trying to help understand if their products is safe. So make sure, you know, if someone approaches you about an in-furrow strategy, you know, that they have some good data, you know, they're working with us, and we can help that, because the last thing you want to do is lose a field of beets due to salt injury. And we've seen this happen over the years. So again, call us if you're thinking about this. Let's talk. Don't want to see that happen to you. And especially compatibility with Quadris. That's such a Mustang. I mean, that's kind of standard practice. We want to make sure that works. Okay, to wrap up here on my part, I want to talk a little bit about Rhizoctonia Fungicides. So we did some different tests again this year, looking at some mixes. One of the things we're kind of focusing on is, you know, can we look at some, you know, either adding to Quadris, or are there some other products that might help Quadris and maybe bring some Fusarium activity to the mix. So again, we're seeing more seedling diseases, especially when we're having issues with some heavy rain in the spring, and that puts a real challenge on there. And we're seeing a little bit more Fusarium in general in the growing area. And so this is something we're watching, trying to see if we can come up with some solutions or some risk reducers for that disease. So one of the things, Topsin's one that, you know, in theory should have some Fusarium activity. And so we're kind of looking at that product in furrow with Quadris. In our data this year, you know, it was one of our better ones in terms of reduction in dead beets, and it had good yield. So we are seeing some interesting data with Topsin. Quadris followed by Quadris obviously is the standard. So Quadris in furrow, you can see, followed by a follow-up application of Quadris at the 6th leaf, you know, worked really well. So this, you can kind of compare that application to some of these other ones. We've been testing ProPulse now for a couple of years, and ProPulse seems to bring some activity. ProPulse is Proline plus an SDHI. And, you know, we're kind of hoping that SDHI and ProPulse might help us on the Fusarium. You know, here's Proline again by itself, so not too bad compared to the untreated check. And so, you know, again, all these fungicides here were applied in furrow. except when we add Quadris at the 6th leaf. And so we'll have some information for you to look at when the book comes out. So again, just kind of summarize Rhizoctonia and kind of some new things that are going on for this year. Quadris is, again, the most proven product for Rhizoctonia management. A lot of years of data on that. Again, we're examining these fungicides that we hope can help with Rhizoctonia Fusarium, and that's where Topsin and Propulse kind of come into play. There is a new product, Elatus, so that's pending a label this spring, so watch for that. It's Quadris plus Latinol. So it looks to be safe in furrow, and it should be a Quadris plus. So I'd say if you're, if we get a label on this or you see that, watch for that. You might hear about Elatus, or we'll update you as it gets the label. If you want to try that, I mean, it should be definitely no worse than Quadris because it is Quadris plus this Latinol. So we'll update you on that as if we get a label for that this year. One product that does have that just received a label. We don't have any Michigan sugar data on that. There was some data from MSU on this. Is Excalia from Valent. So it appears to have foliar rhizoc activity. So it's not an in-furrow product. It'll injure beets in furrow, but it's a foliar product, and it seems to have some activity. So we're going to study this a little bit more going forward. But you could try to mix it with Quadris in your foliar application. The rate on Excalia is 2 ounces per acre broadcast equivalent, so you can narrow your band accordingly, to add that to the tank. So it's something you can take a look at. Also, Xanthian will be phasing out in 2021, so BSF is phasing out Xanthian. So again, there's product out there this year, and I think growers are going to use it this year, but after 2021, they'll start to go away. So just wanted to make you aware of that. So with that, that's all I have. Had a question. Does Topsin mix with Quadris in furrow, and was it the full rate of 20 ounces of Topsin? Yes, it was. It was the full rate of Topsin, 20 ounces, obviously reduced to the band. So again, as you reduce the T-band, it would be a 20 ounce rate broadcast, reduce the bandwidth. And we'll keep looking at some nitrogen trials going forward. So thank you. And Dennis is up next.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Corey. Looks like we got quite a few attendees this morning. I appreciate everybody taking some time today to join us. For those of you that may have hopped on a little late, there should be a Q&A button on your screen somewhere, depending on what device you're using. Go ahead and just type in the Q&A, and then we'll try to answer them throughout the meeting. So today I'm going to start talking about, kick off talking about Leafspot. I'm going to review 2020. I want to talk about the genetic tolerance to Leafspot, how that affects our Leafspot control programs. I want to go through some Leafspot control strategies for this year, including what nozzles to use, adjuvants, application timing, when we should be starting, what should our application intervals be, fungicide efficacy, different programs, and then some example programs for 2021, what we might do going into this year. I also want to talk about the CR Plus varieties. You might remember that those are our new tolerant Leafspot varieties that are new this year, and they're going to require a different management strategy. So I would like to talk about those as well. First, looking back at 2020 and reviewing that. So 2020, we had really fantastic. But what was the reasons for that? Well, one of them I think was that we had increased acres planted to a tolerant variety. And that really helps. I'll go into that in a little more detail, but if you look back from a few years ago to now, we do have, there's about half of our acres in 2020 were planted to a tolerant variety. So that really helps with our leaf spot control. We also have some pretty effective spray programs. I think you guys are doing a great job of going out there, spraying on time, starting early, using the right products, and that's really making a difference. So hats off to you guys for making 2020 a successful leaf spot year. Looking back at leaf spot for the last several years, in 2018, we had about 50,000 acres that had an economic impact from leaf spot. So if you look at, that was about a third of our overall acres, and generally we only rate our acres that are going to permanent piles. So if you look at our permanent pile acres, it was a pretty significant portion of our permanent pile acres. In 2019, that went down to 10,000 acres that had economic impact from Leafspot. So that was a trend in the right direction. And then this year we got down to 2020, we got down to about 4,000 acres. So really that's a trend we want to see continue. That's going in the right direction, and hopefully 2021 will be another good year for Leafspot. Now let's look at Leafspot and sugar content a little bit. So if the green bar is the number of acres that were impacted by Leafspot, and the orange line is sugar content. So in 2018, we had about 50,000 acres, once again, impacted by Leafspot, and our sugar content was just slightly over 16. 2019, as acres impacted by Leafspot went down to 10,000 acres, we had an average sugar content of over 18. And then this year in 2020, 4,000 acres impacted by Leafspot and sugar content of around 18.4. So controlling Leafspot definitely allows us to have the potential to increase our sugar content. Doesn't mean that we're going to have high sugar content. No, it doesn't. But what it does allow us to do, a healthy crop going into harvest allows us to capture any weather events or just the environment that allows us to have a little higher sugar. So it's extremely important to have good Leafspot control to have good sugar content. Looking at payment and sugar content, so in 2018, with our lower sugar content of around 16, once again, the orange line is sugar content, and the green bar this time is payment. Looking at 2018, sugar content was just over 16, payment was in the upper 30s. 2019, we increased our sugar content to over 18%. Payment got up to approximately $50. And in 2020, sugar payment is estimated to be around $50 a ton. So definitely that higher sugar content can play into payment. We don't know exactly what the payment is going to be yet for 2020. Finalized. There could be potentially maybe some upside potential. And sugar content isn't the only thing that goes into the payment, obviously. There's a selling price, factory performance, throughput. But sugar content can definitely play a role. So looking at genetic tolerance to Leafspot for the last several years, and this is planted acres from 2018, actually into 2021. And 2021 is an amount of acres based off of reported seed sales. So I'm going to talk in more detail about Leafspot and the highly tolerant varieties, but in 2021, we had about 10% of our planted to the highly tolerant CR plus variety. So that should give us a pretty good opportunity to see those out in the field, how they perform under a wide range of conditions. Looking at the tolerant varieties, if you go back to 2008, pretty significant Leafspot, we only had 18% of our acres getting planted to a tolerant variety. In last year, that was about half of our acres, and this year it's going to be about 43% of our acres. So if you take the highly tolerant and tolerant and kind of lump that together, we'll have over half of our acres again this year planted to a tolerant variety or better. So that's a good trend, and hopefully that can continue. Looking at moderately tolerant varieties, last year you might as well say half of our acres were planted to a tolerant and half were planted to moderately tolerant. This year we're going to see some less acres planted to a moderately tolerant variety. We went from 48% to 32%. And really the difference is we're going to have some more susceptible acres this year, unfortunately. So 2021, we're going to look at about 15% of our acres will be planted to a susceptible variety. That's still way better back than in 2018 when half of our acres were planted to a susceptible variety, and better in 2019. But definitely maybe a little area to watch out for. I will comment that all those susceptible varieties that are being planted this year are all nematode varieties. We continue to see that our nematode tolerant varieties generally often do not have as good of a Leafspot tolerant package. So if you're planting nematode varieties, keep in mind that you're going to need a really good, successful, aggressive spray program in order to help overcome that lack of genetic resistance to Leafspot. So Leafspot control strategies for 2021. Not going to be any, doesn't look like there'll be any big changes in our recommendations and maybe some more minor tweaks. So it's going to be very similar to 2020. One starts with varieties that are planting varieties with good genetic tolerance, Leafspot. All those decisions have been made at this point. I think the seed decisions are pretty well finalized for the year. So there's not a lot we can do there. So now it's really managing that through our spray programs, fungicides during the growing season. So in order to get leaf spot control, we have to optimize spray coverage. That's through nozzle selection, water, pressure, and adjuvants. We need to spray aggressively, start early with short application intervals, and then we want to use effective products because we know that some products perform better than others. So looking at nozzle selection, we want to use a nozzle that produces the correct droplet size. And on the left here, I have the 3D nozzle. That's kind of become my favorite nozzle for leaf spot applications. It produces a pretty uniform droplet size and gives us good coverage. If you look at the water sensitive paper here on the bottom left and both the top of the canopy and the bottom of the canopy, we're getting really good coverage. More blue is better. So that's getting a really good coating of both the upper and lower leaves with that John Deere 3D nozzle. On the right is a turbo T-jet air induction nozzle. Now that nozzle is not really spraying fungicides. It's more designed to spray contact herbicides like Roundup. And you can see when that tip is used, we're not getting very good coverage on the water sensitive paper. There's a bunch of areas that haven't had any fungicide or any water deposited on their leaf. And coverage is king when it comes to applying fungicides, especially when you look at the contact fungicides like Supertin, EBDC, and copper. Those fungicides do not really translocate in the plant at all. They pretty much stay where they land. So it's really important to get good coverage when we're looking at fungicide applications. So looking at the other thing about nozzle selection, it's not just about the type of the nozzle, it's having the proper pressure for the type and the size of the nozzle. So this is a nozzle trial from 2020 that our research department did. Looking at a turbo T-jet, 11002, so that'd be a yellow tip. And before the 3D nozzle, that was probably one of our more popular tips for spraying fungicides, spraying leaf spot. It's still widely used, but I think the 3D nozzle has kind of overtaken that one. And if you look at this, so it was tested at, same nozzle tested at 3 different pressures, 50, 75, and 100 PSI. And the 50 and 75 PSI resulted in less leaf damage, so better disease control than the 100 PSI. So why is that? For years, it was said that, when you're spraying leaf spot, you should use 20 gallon per acre and 100 pounds of pressure. Well, sometimes that 100 pounds of pressure isn't necessarily always the right answer. If looking a little closer here at the O2, so that's the yellow one down here, and going across, generally we would say we want to be in the medium to fine droplet size. So in that 50, so we want to be right in this red circle, and I would say generally right here, just as we start to get into the fine and move away from the medium. So you see that 75 PSI kind of falls in there, and we got good control. The 50 being getting a little closer still gave us good control with that nozzle size. And when we got out to 100 PSI, here we ended up with an extra fine droplet. And what can happen sometimes with those extra fine droplets is they're so small that they never reach the target. They can, if we get a little bit of breeze, they can float away before they ever land on the plant leaf. Or if it's a warm day, or they can evaporate before they ever hit the target. So sometimes that too high of pressure can actually hurt you if you have a little bit of depending on the nozzle size and the type. Now, if you take the same nozzle and go to the next size bigger, an 03, which would be a blue, that one maybe you would want to run at a higher pressure. We got to be up to 80, 90 pounds of pressure in order to get that medium to fine droplet size. So just keep in mind that when you're figuring out what pressure you want to be at, the nozzle type and size does matter. Another thing that we've learned over the years is to use an effective adjuvant. And roles of adjuvants, they do many different things, and not all of them do the same thing, and not all do everything. One thing they can do is they can increase coverage. They can reduce the amount of drift that you get and create more uniform droplets, thereby getting more of the product onto the plant where we want it. They can also increase spreading. So as water droplets land on the leaf, it can cause them to spread out more on the leaf and give us more coverage that way. They can also increase retention on the leaf by helping the fungicide stick to the plant leaf after application. And they can improve the ability of fungicides to enter the plant by helping them go through that waxy cuticle and that waxy surface of the leaf. Several years of our adjuvant trial, and we often call this the sticker spreader trial. And we're going to look mainly at two products here: Master Lock and Regard Plus Diligence. Both, and the reason I include those two, those are the two products that have been tested the last 3 years. And both of those perform very similarly when averaged over the last 3 years over all locations and all treatments. 8.7% leaf damage, and did provide improved control over no adjuvant. The pictures on the bottom show, the difference that an adjuvant can have in some years and sometimes. Both the left and the right photos had this, everything was done the same fungicides at the same timing, but the photo on the left had the proper adjuvant applied. So there is other adjuvants that we've tested and we know we're comfortable with besides Master Lock and Regard Plus Diligence, but we know that those two work well also. So the other thing we want to do is we want to spray aggressively. We want to start early, June 25th. Quite often we do that with the EBDC only. We want to continue that. I think that's really helped with our Leafspot control programs and getting the results we're getting. It's getting out there early before the disease is present. We want to follow that application up of 7 to 10 days with an EBDC plus something, and generally that's a triazole. So we're going to want to tank mix 2 products. Then we're generally going to tank mix 2 products every 14 days for the remainder of the season. And that's going to continue until sometime in September. We want to protect the crop. How long we have to spray and how long we need protection depends on variety, weather patterns, what kind of disease pressure we're getting. More tolerant varieties, if we have good disease control, we can generally stop spraying sooner than more susceptible varieties. So this is the BEETcast trial from 2020, looking at, and this is pulling out 3 different varieties: Beta 1703, Crystal 675, and Hillshog 9865. 1703 and 675 are both tolerant varieties. 1703 would be one of our most tolerant varieties. 675 is still tolerant, but falls a little bit lower in the tolerance zone, but still considered a tolerant variety. And 9865 would be a moderately tolerant variety. The 2 tolerant varieties were sprayed at 6 fungicides applied. The moderately tolerant had 7. And then when we compare that untreated RWSA to the more aggressive RWSA, and when I say more aggressive, that's a more aggressive spray strategy, starting earlier, tighter intervals, and more applications. And we had a pretty big increase in RWSA from spraying 6 or 7 times, depending on a variety. If you go down to the bottom right, the average of almost 1,700 pounds of increased RWSA by keeping Leafspot under control, and that translated into about $275 of additional revenue. So even though it's costly and time consuming to make those fungicide applications, they definitely have a return on investment for you. And this is just looking at the BEETcast trial, comparing Crystal 675 untreated. You can see we got a pretty significant burn down, a lot of loss of leaf. And the programs that we're using and recommending, they're working. 7 sprays, we got a nice healthy green canopy with very low leaf spot and good control. So what we're doing is working. Next thing I want to talk about is fungicide efficacy. And I think we need to know, and we all know, that products performance varies. Some products work better than others. We know that Super Tin is highly effective. That's been one of our best products for a number of years and continues to be. Triazoles are also very effective. They are generally more effective on Cercospora than Alternaria, but still generally do a good job for us when they're put into a program. And there is a different varying levels of efficacy between the triazoles. I think today had widespread strawberry resistance for a number of years. Can we put those back into the program successfully? We are seeing quite a bit of strawberry resistance, but at the same time, it looks like we're getting some good control when those are still included in the program. Says my connection. Can you guys hear me okay? I'll continue on. I guess if you can't hear me, continue to type in and Elizabeth will let me know. So in the fungicide efficacy trials, we in our fungicide efficacy trials, we start with the EBDC, and then we spray, we pick a fungicide plus EBDC, and let's use that same fungicide again. So in this example, it'd be Super 10 plus EBDC, followed by EBDC, followed by EBDC. So that's not a program you're going to use out in the field, but allows us to see how some products may be performing. The whole slide. Okay, so I had a request to repeat this slide. Apparently I was having an unstable connection. So product performance varies between different fungicides. We know that Super 10 is highly effective. It's more effective than our triazoles are effective as well, and they of efficacy. Some triazoles perform better than others, and we generally say that triazole say that Provosol, Proline, and Inspire are probably our top 3 performing triazoles compared overall triazoles. And then what about the strobies? Daniel's going to show you some strobies. Daniel's going to talk some more about strobe resistance. We are seeing widespread strobe resistance, but it still looks like the, strobies, especially Delaro and Praxor, are performing well. And so, fungus. So we can see that Super 10 is doing a good job for us. It's got a good dark green healthy canopy with a good overall disease. This Super 10 generally will perform better than the triazoles, and it looks like it's performing better than Enable. We got a darker, greener, fuller canopy. Looking at Praxor versus Enable, it looks like the Praxor canopy is a little fuller and greener. Both provide a good overall control, but just to show you that little bit of difference between those two. So what about our Leafspot programs? We want to use programs. Here's where we test programs that are recommended and used. And we also look at this opportunity to test some new ideas. What maybe will be the strategy going forward and try to figure out what may work in the future. I also want to talk about Delaro and Praxor. It looks like we might see some benefits with those that is not related to leaf spot control with a healthier, greener, fuller canopy. So looking at leaf spot programs, so this is Delaro on the left. We have a program that had Delaro and Proline used one time. In this situation, it was earlier in the season. And on the right was a program with no strobe. So you can see that something's happening here where we're getting a bigger, greener, fuller, healthier canopy versus on the right where we're not getting that full canopy. We got a little more leaf spot. The canopy is a little yellow and not quite as full. Then if we can compare Delaro plus Proline to copper EBDC, once again, a bigger, healthier, fuller canopy, versus the copper EBDC. The copper EBDC still provides good disease control, but we're not getting quite as much plant growth with that versus Delaro plus Proline. Looking at Praxor versus no strobe, once again, we see that Praxor giving us a dark green, lush, full canopy fall compared to the no strobe. And once again, compared to copper EBDC, we have that fuller canopy from that Praxor application. So it looks like the strobies are doing something that maybe isn't related to disease control. And when you take all of our leaf spot programs, and I broke them out a little bit, we have programs that included a strobe and programs that did not include strobe. We were able to increase the gross the RWSA by 480 pounds on all programs that included a strobe. So on this graph, the green bar is a no strobe, and that's a sugar per acre, and the orange line is dollars per acre. On the right is all the programs that included a strobe. So we increased sugar by 480 pounds, And the orange line, we increased revenue by $75 per acre. So when you average that out near 2 locations across treatments with or without a strobe, we did see a pretty significant increase in both sugar per acre and gross revenue. So to summarize Leafspot, we want to ensure that we have good coverage and retention. That's by using the proper nozzles, having 20 gallons of water per more, the correct pressure, and the correct adjuvant. We want to start early. So June 25th, we don't know if we need to start spraying June 25th. We use that as a rough date now. It may be earlier, it may be later, depending on the growing season. We want to spray aggressively. So that means making our follow-up applications on time or early. If we're scheduled to spray tomorrow and it's going to rain, late. I think it's better to end the season a couple days early with your Leafspot control program than to get too spread out during the growing season. Fungicides do perform different. Some perform better than others, but many can be used successfully in a program. I think you should strongly consider using Delaro or Praxor. Those are both products with strobe in them, and it looks like it's giving us some sort of a healthier plant through the growing season. We also want to look at Praxor plus Topsin plus EBDC. So I think if you're using Praxor, I think a good tank mix is Praxor, Topsin plus EBDC. That can help overcome some of that strobe resistance. If you're not using Praxor in your program, then I would put Topsin in with the Super Tin. Do not apply triazole strobies or tin back to back, and always make sure you tank mix triazole strobies with EBDC or copper. EBDC or copper, it's okay to apply alone, or tank mix EBDC and copper. And it's okay to apply EBDC and copper back to back, but do not do that with triazole strobies or tin. So looking at a couple of Leafspot programs, examples, and this is using all fungicide classes. So on the left, I'll go through that one first. So it's starting June 25th with an EBDC, following that up about 10 days later with a triazole plus EBDC, then tin plus EBDC, then Praxor plus Topsin plus EBDC. Once again, if we're making a Praxor application, it's a good idea to put Topsin in with that plus EBDC. Then triazole EBDC, tin EBDC, and finish that up with a triazole EBDC if necessary in September. On the right is a very similar program. Once again, starting early with the EBDC, then coming back with the Laro plus Proline plus EBDC. Following that with tin, Topsin, EBDC. So I do like one Topsin application early in the Leafspot program, either tank mix with Praxor or Super Tin. And then that Super Tin, Topsin, EBDC, triazole EBDC, tin EBDC, triazole EBDC, and then finish with a copper EBDC. Now we know that we may have to spray another time after September 13th, depending on the growing season. And there's some varieties and we have good disease control, maybe it'll stop earlier than that. But this gives you kind of a start and a base program for the growing season. What about if you don't have tin in your program? So looking at a no tin program, because I understand and realize that there's some growers that are unable to spray. But basically the strategy stays the same. We're gonna start early and we're gonna rotate fat classes of fungicides. Start with the EBDC, then apply triazole plus EBDC, then Praxor plus Topsin plus EBDC, triazole EBDC, copper EBDC, then Delaro plus Proline plus EBDC, and then copper EBDC. And generally, we would say we only want one strobe applied in the growing season for leaf spot control. But if you're not using tin in your program, you may really have to consider and probably are going to have to use a strobe twice. So that was talking about leaf spot control programs, our normal varieties, more traditional varieties. But what about the CR plus varieties? Tolerant CR plus varieties. They're Beta 1941, Beta 1065, Crystal 943, and Crystal 021. And those varieties really do need to have a new strategy for at least provide much more genetic tolerance than we have with our other varieties. So with that increased level of genetic tolerance with the highly tolerant variety, fungicide applications is it going to take to get adequate season-long disease control? When do we need to apply those fungicides? When should we begin? And what is the application interval? Now, currently we spray approximately every 14 days. Do we need to continue to do that with these varieties, or can we extend that application interval? So looking applications for a variety, and this includes all varieties that are approved to plant. Our more traditional varieties will take 5 applications, and generally we would say 6 to 8, depending on tolerance, in order to get season-long disease control. Well, our new CR Plus highly tolerant varieties, those look like they're going to be around 3 fungicide applications to long disease control. Looking at our BEETcast trial, we did include a CR Plus variety, Crystal 943. If you look at the left, that's the untreated, so that had no fungicide applications at all during the growing season for Leafspot, and that's strictly genetic tolerance. And looking at that, we'd say, yeah, that control looks pretty good. There's a lot of years we've been really happy with that disease control. On the right is 943 with 3 fungicides applied on July 1st, August 1st, and September 1st. So the 1st, and the 1st. And, you know, it resulted in a bigger, fuller, greener, and healthier with less disease. I'll give you a little close-up view of that. If you look at the 943 untreated, when you take a close-up view, you can see we got quite a few spots coming in on the leaf here. We're getting some spots starting to go together. We're losing some leaf tissue. So that was enough leaf spot that it did have a negative effect on yield. Look at sugar per acre and revenue per acre. The untreated RWST and Crystal 943 was 11,570 pounds. 3 fungicides applied, the first, and the first was 12,760 pounds. So we increased the sugar per acre by those 3 fungicide applications of approximately 1,200 pounds per acre, and that's about $195 in increased revenue. Looking at, hopefully you can see in this picture here, untreated on the left, treated on the right. Not a huge difference visually, but we are seeing that that 3 fungicide applications did result in increased revenue. So our recommendation for the highly tolerant variety and their fungicides is to spray 3 times, July 1st, August 1st, and September 1st. We did not, so that late June EBDC application, I talked about that earlier, and we've been doing that for several years on our more traditional varieties. We did not test that this year. As we've talked to other growing regions that are struggling with leaf spot probably more than we are and really having a hard time with control, they start applying fungicides on these highly tolerant varieties. They're still getting better disease control. So it may not be a bad idea to keep that EBDC in your program early. It's not required, but it may, if you have some tolerant varieties and some highly tolerant varieties, you may want to consider still spraying your highly tolerant plus varieties with that EBDC early. We're still going to want to rotate fungicide classes, so no triazoles, strobies, or tins back to back. We do want a tank mix with EBDC or copper still, and I'll get into a little more detail on that. And we only have 1 year of data on these new CR Plus varieties, so we're kind of learning as we go as well. So our recommendations may change based on weather conditions, experience, and disease pressure. So looking at tank mixing with EBDC or copper, it will result in increased disease control. Picture on the left on the bottom is Crystal 943 sprayed with EBDC as a tank mix, and without EBDC as tank mix, we got a better disease control. So it's one thing we see with EBDC is often we'll see applications and fungicide programs that have an EBDC applied repeatedly do result in and it also helps. The other reason to continue to apply EBDC or copper in a tank mix is because of resistance management. We know that we're getting increased levels of resistance to super tin as well as the triazoles. We've had widespread resistance to the strobies. So in order to manage resistance and keep the fungicides that we currently have effective for as long as possible, we want to continue to tank mix. I have a couple of example programs for these 4 CR Plus highly tolerant varieties. So EBDC early is optional. You'd follow that up. So then July 1st, Delaro plus Proline plus EBDC, or EBDC, and then Triazole plus EBDC. Another option is once again, that EBDC early is optional. Follow up Triazole EBDC, Preaxor plus Topsin plus EBDC, and Triazole EBDC. So I just had a question come in with the late June EBDC, can Roundup be mixed with that? So in general, we would say yes, but keep in mind that Roundup application and a fungicide application are two different things. You know, when you're spraying Roundup, you generally want a little lower pressure, more around 40 pounds of pressure, and you use generally less water, most typically 10 to 15 gallon per acre. And when we're spraying fungicides, even if it is EBDC alone, we're going to want more water, so 20 gallon per acre with a little higher pressure because coverage is so important. So if you are going to tank mix Roundup and EBDC, I would encourage you to treat that as a fungicide application where you would apply, you know, so you're going to use higher pressure and better coverage with more water rather than treating that as a Roundup application, because we really want that EBDC to be effective as possible. There is also times where we can get some antagonism with Roundup from the EBDC, so you may see your Roundup didn't work quite as good as you were expecting, but at the same time, it seems to be okay. So yeah, if you want to mix EBDC and Roundup together, that is okay, but there is a couple watch outs for that. So to summarize leaf spot for 2021, good control is critical. If we do not have good leaf spot control, it's really tough to maximize production. We need to have a strong, healthy canopy going into harvest and fall so that we can maximize both sugar per acre and sugar per ton. And I think a program approach is the best chance at success. I think there's a lot of different fungicides that can be used successfully. There's different programs that can be used, but we need to follow the basics of starting early, rotating herb fungicides, tank mixing, and keeping those short application intervals, using good adjuvants, and getting good coverage. And building on the success of 2020. You know, we had really good leaf spot control and a good overall year in 2020, so we really want to continue to that in 2021. Okay, so we have some questions down here. I'm going to try to go through some of those. So the question from one of the questions we had is, what did you control with the Strobe, Cercospora or Alternaria? So actually we were controlling both. We know that the Strobes are generally a little bit better on Alternaria than Cercospora, but we were controlling both with. So the next question is, what application are you adding the Strobe? It can go in multiple places. Some guys like to put it in some like to put it into the end, towards the end, the Strobe. I generally, if I'm using Delaro, I generally put that one pretty early in the program just because it's such a good leaf spot product. And I generally try to put my good products first. There's some guys that'll put it more towards the end when it seems like later in the season, we're getting a little more Alternaria and they want to try to focus on that. But I generally like it a little earlier in the season, although it can go in the end as well. I'm going through the question. I think I've got all the questions answered. There was a question here. Show a higher percentage of varieties being planted in 21 to a susceptible variety than in 20. Is that because our ratings and change? Corey answered that. He says our standard for leaf spots are higher than ever, but some of the new nematode tolerant varieties are right on the line of tolerant and susceptible. Some of those new really it comes down to those new nematode tolerant varieties. They are right on the cusp of being a moderately tolerant or tolerant. They do offer a higher sugar per ton, but they are not quite as good on leaf spot. So, but we do have some pretty aggressive leaf spot standards now. I think I went through all the questions that I had. Daniel's going to be up next. He's going to talk about, go through his data for the 2020 growing season and his trials. I'm going to come back in a little while and talk about herbicide resistant weeds, both what we should be doing with the current tools that we have. And then it looks like we're possibly going to have a couple new products get labeled for 2021 that can help manage amaranth and water hemp specifically, and I'll get into some details about those.
All right. Well, thank you, Dennis, for that nice introduction. And I'm not going to share my screen in hopes of keeping the better connection. And if I do have connection troubles, please let me know so we can correct those. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Winter Agronomy meeting today. My name is Daniel Bublitz. I'm the Director of Sugar Beet Advancement, I'll be discussing the sugar beet advancement trials for 2020. So last year, sugar beet advancement had about 30 different trials. 8 of these were variety trials, and the remaining 22 were agronomy trials. I talked about the variety trials during the seed meeting presentation, so today I'm going to focus on the agronomy trials. We had several different types of agronomy trials this year, including some that were looking at soil health and nutrients. And so a couple of those included our clover and radish trial, and also one looking at different fertilizer additives, and then pop-up fertilizers with asteroid. Then we also had a trial looking at the impact of seed size on the efficacy of a high-speed planter. And I also did a couple of different disease management trials looking at Cercospora leaf spot, Rhizoctonia root rot, and nematodes. So the first trial that I'm going to talk about today was our clover and radish cover crop study that we did with Sylvester Farms. So in this study, we were wanting to see which cover crop, either clover, radish, or no cover crop, would provide the highest sugar beet yields in the following year. So what we did was we had a wheat field in 2019 where we planted clover with a drill in the spring. And then after the wheat was harvested, we came back in and drilled in some radishes in different strips. Then we also left some strips without any sort of cover crop. So you can see how we got those very well-defined strips in the field like that. So in the following spring, we planted sugar beets into this field, and we observed them for differences in yield. All right, and so this page is showing the results from that. And so in this chart and the rest of the charts that I have, if I have green in the top title there, that means that that variable had a significant difference. But if it's black, that means that there was no significant difference. So what we found with the cover crop study is that both the clover and the radish significantly increased yield, both tonnage and RWSA, as compared to the check. Then we also figured in the expense of each one of those cover crops. So for the clover, we figured about $25 total per acre. For the radish, about $88 per acre. Then no cover crop, about $10 per acre. When we figured in those expenses and looked at the net revenue per acre, we saw that the clover had a significantly higher net revenue than both the radish and the check. All right, so the next trial I'm going to talk about was looking at PowerCal. So PowerCal is a calcium nitrate fertilizer. And so this product is intended to help to increase the available calcium to the crop, which is intended to improve the health of the plants, as well as improve Cercospora leaf spot management. Although in the trial that we had this year, we really didn't have enough Cercospora to be able to evaluate that. And so in our trial, we had 3 different treatments. The first was a check that had no PowerCal applied. Then we also had a treatment that had PowerCal applied 3 times in a foliar fashion, and that was tank mixed with 3 Cercospora fungicide applications. Then we also had a treatment where we had the foliar applications, but it was also applied pre-plant incorporated. And so what we found was that there was no significant difference in yield between any of these 3 treatment groups. So the next trial that we did was looking at adding Novus and boron in with some Cercospora fungicide applications. And so with this trial, we were looking at, as I said, the boron and then also Novus, which is a 25% nitrogen product. We added both those together in with the 2nd through the 5th Cercospora fungicide applications. And what we found here was, again, there was no significant difference in any of the yield metrics that we looked at. So the next product that we examined was QLF Boost. And this product is a carbon-based liquid fertilizer additive. And the goal of this product is to increase microbial activity and also provide some sulfur to the plants. And so the way that we applied it was that we mixed it in with the 2x2 fertilizer as well as with Inforo Quadris. And so as I mentioned, we have the 2 treatments here, the check that received no boost and the boost treatment that received the product in both ways that I just mentioned. So we actually tried this same sort of trial last year. We actually had some fairly promising results then. The yields weren't significantly different, but we did see a significant increase in population. This year, however, we did not see a significant increase in yield, and we also did not see a significant increase in population. Although we did come fairly close to seeing the early population difference be significant. So for our test, we used a p-value of 0.05. And in this trial, we had a p-value of 0.08. And so anything that would be significant would have a p-value of 0.05 or lower. And so this one just barely missed. So because of the results from last year and it being close this year, we might take another look at Boost next year. So within that same location, we had another trial looking at QLF Boost and CX1. So CX1 is a soil biologic that's extracted from plant compost. And it's basically a cocktail of different soil fungi and bacteria. And it's intended to improve soil biology, nutrient availability, and disease tolerance. And so we had 3 different treatments within this test. The first being the check that had none of the Boost or CX1 applied. Then we had a treatment with the Boost applied in the same fashion that I described in the previous test. And we also had a treatment with the Boost and the CX1 applied. And the CX1 was applied in the 2x2 as well as the in-furrow quadrus. And so here, once again, we did not see a significant difference in yield or rhizoctonia tolerance or population. So the next product that we looked at was Levisol. So Levisol is a 2% nitrogen fertilizer and pure chelating agent made by West Central. And so the goal of this product is to improve nutrients availability for the crop. And we did a trial of this last year, as did Michigan Sugar, and we had some fairly promising results from that. So in our advancement trial last year, we actually did see a significant increase in tons with the use of this product. So we thought that it would be worth trying it again this year. And so generally this product is applied in a T-band at a rate of 2 quarts per acre with the in-furrow quadrus. And this year we actually tried this at 4 different locations. So the first location that we had this was with Wright Farms near Reese. And so we had the 2 treatments again, the Levisol and the check, and difference in yield between the 2 treatments. The next location where we had this product was with Lake Ewald Farms up by Unionville. And so here again, we had the 2 different treatments, the check and the Levisol. But this test was a little bit different from the other locations in that this trial was actually planted very early and it needed to be replanted due to freezing conditions that decreased the population. And so when the trial was replanted, we replanted right over top of the existing beets. And so because of that, the Levisol treatment essentially received 4 quarts per acre with 2 quarts at each one of the planting times. But again, we did not see a significant difference in yield between the 2 treatments. Okay. All right, so the question that I got was, what were the soil phosphorus levels at the locations? And we did not take a measurement of that, so I don't have that data here for you. All right, so the next location where we tested Levisol was with Schindler Farms over by Cuckhollen. And so here again, we applied it in the same way, in 2 quarts per acre with the in-furrow quadrus and Mustang. And here we actually did see a significant difference in both tonnage and RWSA, but the check yields were significantly higher than the Levisol. And so why the Levisol treatment went backwards here, we really don't have a good answer for that. So it might be worth investigating further though. So our final location with Levisol was with Huff-Tailing Farms near Guilford. And so at this location, we actually had 2 different Levisol tests. The first one was comparing Levisol at 1 quart per acre with the check that had no Levisol. Then the other test was looking at 1 quart of Levisol compared with 2 quarts of Levisol. And so here again, in both these tests, we saw no significant difference in yield between either of the treatments. So either between the 1 quart and the check or the 2 quarts and the 1 quart. All right, so the next trial that we did was looking to see the impact of seed size on the effectiveness of high-speed planters. So many growers who have high-speed planters will often select the ELS seed size, thinking that the bigger seed will plant better through their high-speed planter. And so we set up this trial with Maxwell Farms to see if that is indeed the case. And so here we actually looked at 3 different seed sizes, including ELS, regular pellets, and the mini pellets. And the way this trial was set up, it's actually kind of like 2 different tests here one comparing the ELS with the regular pellets, and one comparing the ELS with the mini pellets. So the planter that we used here was the John Deere 1770 NT CCS. And we had precision planting technology on the planter, including speed tubes, the VSET2 seed monitor, and Delta Force hydraulic downforce. And so one other thing I want to mention here too is, so the way that we measured the results of this trial then was sometime, I believe it was in June, we actually came out with a tape measure, and within each one of the treatment types in each one of the reps, we measured 4 rows, 12-foot sections in those rows, and we measured the spacing between the seeds from that. So as we were planting this trial, our planting monitor actually was kind of going a little bit berserk on us. So at the ELS, the singulation was at 99% and the skips were at 1%. But when we went over to the regular pellets, the singulation dropped to 95% and the skips went up to 5%. Then with the minis, the singulation went down to 86% and the skips came up to 14%. And we think this was in large part due to just the difference in the reading with the seed size. So not the actual planting. All right, so then for our results, here in these two tables, I'm reporting for both the ELS and the mini comparison and the regular pellet and the ELS comparison, the average seed spacing, the average standard deviation in the seed spacing, and the population in 100 feet of row. And so of these 3 measurements, in my opinion, probably the standard deviation is the most important to look at because that is showing the variability in the seed spacing. And so here we actually saw no significant difference in average spacing, the standard deviation, or the population. And so from this one trial anyway, we can conclude that there was no difference in the planting ability of the planter based on seed size. All right, so the next group of trials I want to cover today is our trials looking at pop-up fertilizer mixed with an asteroid applied in furrow. So asteroid is an azoxystrobin fungicide that is similar to Quadrus, but it has better mixing capability with fertilizer. So we actually tested asteroid with several different pop-up fertilizers, including Nature's Triple Option, the Wilbur Ellis Great Start, Sure Crops Sure Start, and then AgriSolutions Power Starter. And so we had these at 4 different locations, one location for each one of the pop-up types. And then in each one of the tests, all of the treatments received 2x2 fertilizer in addition to the pop-up. Well, if that was their treatment. All right, so at our first location, that was with Rhizoctonia Farms, this trial was conducted on a sandy soil type. And we've done studies with Rhizoctonia Farms in the past, looking at the impact of pop-up fertilizer. And we've actually seen a significant increase in yield with the pop-up fertilizer in the past. And that's probably in large part due to the sandy soil type that is here. And so in this trial, we had 3 different treatments, including the asteroid with the pop-up fertilizer, then the pop-up fertilizer only, then the check that had neither the asteroid nor the pop-up. And so in this test from this past year, we actually saw no significant difference in yield between any of the 3 treatments. But we did see that the asteroid and pop-up had significantly lower dead beats than what the check had. And so why we didn't see an impact from the pop-up this year when we have in previous years, we're not exactly sure why, but it could have been partially due to a major rain event that we had. On May 18th, there was actually a 6-inch rain that came through, which could have potentially washed out some of the nutrients that were applied. So our next trial looking at the pop-up fertilizers in furrow with asteroid was done with Richmond Brothers. And so at this location, we actually had 4 different treatments. The first being Great Start with asteroid, and so that was our pop-up treatment. And then we also had Nutrio Unlock and Puric Prime with asteroid. Nutrio Unlock as a soil biologic, and Puric Prime is a humic acid product. Then we also had a treatment with asteroid only, then a final treatment that had the check, which didn't have any of these products applied to it. And so once again, we saw no significant difference in yield between any of these products. And so one thing I did want to point out, though, is that even though it wasn't significant, it looked like numerically there was a 1.6 ton difference in the tonnage between the top and the bottom variety. But as I mentioned, that was very not significant though. We had a very high p-value of 0.35. And again, it needs to be 0.05 or below to be significant. So that difference is, according to the stats, completely at random, and it could have just as easily been the check that came first here with the tonnage as any of the other treatments. All right, so the next trial where we had the in-furrow pop-up fertilizer was with Hufftailing Farms over by Sandusky. So here we again had 3 different treatments, including the pop-up with asteroid, and the asteroid alone, and the check that had neither the asteroid nor the pop-up. And here again, we did not see a significant difference in yield between any of these 3 treatments. So our final location that had the in-furrow pop-up fertilizer was with AMK Farms over by Saginaw. And here again, we had 3 different treatments, the asteroid only, the pop-up with asteroid, and then the check. And so here I don't have any yield data for the check, because with this particular trial, we didn't intend on harvesting the check, but we wanted to include it to have population data and deadbeat data. And so here we saw no significant difference in yield between the pop-up fertilizer and asteroid, or the asteroid alone, but we did see a significant difference in population between those 2 treatments and the check. All right, so now I'm going to shift gears here and begin to talk about my disease-specific trials. So the first I'm going to talk about is a Rhizoctonia management trial that we did with Van Boom Farms. And so this trial was actually inspired by some work that we were doing back in 2019, where we tried several different Rhizoctonia management strategies, but in many of them we weren't seeing enough Rhizoctonia to actually have a difference in our treatments. And so that got us to thinking, with some of the very resistant varieties that we have to Rhizoctonia now, is it still necessary in every situation to apply 2 applications of Quadrus? And so at this location, we had 2 different varieties, including Beta 1606, which was a resistant variety to Rhizoctonia, and Cedex 1278, which is a susceptible variety. Then for each one of those varieties, we had 4 different Quadrus treatments, including a check that had no Quadrus applications, then an in-furrow only treatment, then a foliar application only treatment, then having both the in-furrow and the foliar Quadrus. So at this location, we had very high Rhizoctonia pressure. Tom actually made the comment that in this trial, we were seeing some of the highest Rhizoctonia pressure that we had in several years in the advancement trials. So you can see the pictures that I have on the screen now. The one on the left is of our best treatment as far as Rhizoctonia management. The one on the right was the one hardest hit by Rhizoctonia. You can see that there is a huge difference in the deadbeat counts between those. All right, so diving into the data from this trial, we actually got some very interesting results. And so we actually did see a significant difference in yield between these different treatments, both in tonnage and RWSA, with the top grouping of varieties being the Beta 1606, with either both applications of Quadrus, the in-furrow, or the foliar application. So all 3 of those were not significantly different from each other. Then when we look at the deadbeat counts here, we actually again had statistical differences, with the 4 1606 treatments being in the top grouping and the others coming behind that. So if you look at our deadbeat counts, we actually had a wide range in those counts, with some of our highest being up to about 700 in 1,200 feet of row. And so again, that's some very high Rhizoctonia pressure that's present in this field. So now this chart looks at the mean separation for the tonnage for each one of the different treatments. And so in our top grouping, we have the Beta 1606 with either both applications of Quadrus or 1 application, either the in-furrow or the foliar. And again, all 3 of those were not significantly different from each other. Then our next grouping was the Beta 1606 with no applications of Quadrus. Then after that was the Cedex 1278 with both applications. And after that, the Cedex 1278 with at least 1 of the applications. So that'd be the in-furrow or the foliar. And so neither one of those were significantly different from each other. The final treatment that was the Cedex 1278 with no applications of Quadrus. And so really, after looking at this data, I see 2 main takeaways that you can gain from this trial. The first being that if you're in a high Rhizoctonia pressure situation, the very best thing that you can do to help to manage the disease is to plant a resistant variety. Then the second main takeaway is that when you're planting a resistant variety, and this would be particularly true if you're actually in a low Rhizoctonia situation, it looks like there's no statistical difference between any of the Quadris applications. So if you have one application of Quadris, that should be enough to help with that situation. All right, so the next trial that we did was again looking at root disease. And so in this location, I was actually called out to the field by Ackerman Brother Farms to come take a look at it. Oh, it was about the first part of July. And they were having some major root disease issues here in spite of having applied 2 applications of Quadris earlier in the season. And so I actually found several different types of root diseases here, including Rhizoctonia, Fusarium, and Aphanomyces. So I actually called up the Michigan Sugar team, as well as collaborators at Michigan State and the USDA to come and take a look at the field. And what we decided to do here was to set up a trial looking at a potential mid-season kind of like a rescue treatment of the field to see if we can improve the disease situation here. And so we had 3 different treatments taking a look at that. And the first was a check that had no fungicides applied at the timing. And the other 2 were broadcast applications of either Topsin or Quadris. And those applications were done on July 24th. So after taking the dead beet counts later in the season, right around harvest time, we saw no significant difference between any of the treatments here. And so in this situation, it does not appear as though that rescue treatment really helped the grower any. All right, so our next trial was looking at Propulse against Quadris in furrow as a way of managing Rhizoctonia. And so the hope here would be that if we need it, Propulse could be a substitute for Quadris and also potentially give us some sugar beet nematode control. So we had 3 different treatments here, including Propulse, Quadris, and the check. And here, in this particular field, there was a very low level of root disease. And so we did not see a significant difference between any of the treatments as far as yield. And we also did not see a significant difference in the level of sugar beet nematode in the fall sampling that we did. All right, so now I'm going to talk about Movento insecticide. Movento is an insecticide which may help to manage root aphid and sugar beet nematode. The way that we looked at it in our trials this year was that we had 2 applications, one conducted in late June and the other in early July. And this product can be mixed with Stochasper Leafspot fungicides. So we actually did some of this same work back in 2019, and we had mixed results from those trials. So the first trial that we did back in 2019 was with Lake Ewald Farms, and we saw a significant increase in tonnage at that location. However, at the location we had with Laracha Farms, we actually saw a significant decrease in tonnage. So we wanted to try this product again this year and see if we could straighten some of this out. So our first location was with Grandma Farms up by Seaboing. And at this location, we did not see a significant difference in yield between either the Movento or the check treatments. However, when it came to the sugar beet nematode level, we actually did see a significant decrease in juvenile nematodes with the Movento application. So then the other Movento trial that we had was at Spartan Acre Farms, and that was over by Freeland. And so here again, we had the Movento against the check. This time the Movento was applied by itself and not with Stochasper fungicides. And so here so at this location, we thought there was sugar beet nematode prior to planting the trial. But as it turns out, when we did the fall sampling, we didn't find any nematodes to speak of here. Then also when we look at RWST and tonnage, we did not see a significant difference between the two treatments. But for the sugar, we actually saw a significant decrease in sugar in our Movento treatment. So we were rather surprised by that. We really wouldn't expect to see that from the product. So really, I guess in my head, the main takeaway from the Movento trials this year was that we really didn't see a significant benefit from adding this product in. And that could have been partially because there wasn't that much root aphid this year, and it might be more effective against that than against nematodes. All right, so as Dennis mentioned in his presentation, we actually did some screening of Stochasper Leafspot for strobilarian resistance this year. And this was a major collaborative effort between Sugar Beet Advancement, Saginaw Valley State University, Michigan Sugar, the USDA, and MSU. And the goal of this project when we started was really to try to give an in-season results to growers to see if they had strobilurin resistance in their fields. And so the technique that we used here was a PCR RFLP assay. And this method is quicker than the traditional spiral plate method, so we could give those in-season results. But the disadvantage is that it doesn't give the level of resistance. And so from these results, we actually were able to sample 37 different locations total. And we had about 530 different lesions that were sampled. And of those 530 lesions, 510 or 96% had the gene for strobilurin resistance. But again, this work did not give the level of resistance. And so based on what we're seeing in the field and in a couple different trials, we still believe that the strobilurins are providing a benefit for Cercospora leaf spot management and should still be included in your leaf spot management program, particularly in areas where you do have an alternaria issue. All right, so the final test I want to talk about today is the test where we're using an agricultural burner to heat treat and manage Cercospora leaf spot. So I mentioned this project a little bit last year. And what the idea behind this is that Cercospora is actually very heat sensitive. And so we thought that if we could use an agricultural burner to treat it with this heat in the fall prior to defoliating the field, that we could potentially decrease the inoculum and the amount of disease then in the following year. And so this is actually part of a larger study looking at a couple of different inoculum reduction strategies that we're doing with Jamie Wilbur and Alex Hernandez at MSU. And so far, we've been seeing some actually very promising results from the burner. And so based on the fall 2019 heat treatment, we saw a significant reduction in lesion viability and in the production of spores from lesions, the heat treatment compared to the other treatments that were tested here. And then in the following year, so in the summer of 2020, we actually had a lower level of Cercospora in the trial than what the other treatments had. And so far, we've been seeing similar results for the fall 2020 treatment. All right, so on this slide, I have some of the results from the lesion viability and the spore production from fall of 2019 and fall of 2020. These images are courtesy of Alex Hernandez. So on the top chart for each one of these, that's the percent of sporulating lesions. And the bottom chart, that's the percent lesion viability. So you can see that in each case, the burner had a significantly lower percentage than what the other treatments had, except for the plow treatment in the fall of 2020. All right, so then this chart is actually the results from observing the amount of Cercospora that occurred in the field this past year. And so you can see that there was actually significantly less Cercospora in the burner area of the treatment or the test than in the other areas of the test. And so this was just kind of a brief overview of this study. And Dr. Jamie Wilbur will be going into more detail on this at the sugar beet research update that we're going to have on February 17th. So I just wanted to take a moment to review some of the key points that I want you to take away from this presentation. The first is that both clover and radish cover crops are able to improve your sugar beet yield the following year. Although we had significantly higher net revenue with the clover than with either of the other two treatments, the check or the radish. Then also, we did not, in many of our trials this year, we did not see a significant yield impact from the products that we were looking at. The first of these were the PowerCal and then the Novus and Boron trials. With both of those, I think the main takeaway is that if you already have enough nutrients supplied for your crop, you really don't see that much of a benefit by adding more. Then we also did not see a significant yield impact from the QLF Boost, the CX1, the Levosol, the pop-up with Asteroid, or the Movento treatments. Then finally, with our Quadris application study, the main takeaways from that are that if you're in a high Rhizoctonia situation, you definitely want to be planting a resistant variety there. Then also comparing the Quadris applications within the resistant variety and the susceptible. Within our resistant variety, one application gave us the same yield as having two applications. Then in the susceptible variety though, the two application had a better yield than what the one application did. And with that, I would like to thank everyone who's helped to make this research possible. Oh, all right, I guess we have a couple of questions here. Yep. All right, so the first question that we have is asking about what changes can be made for future tests to increase the likelihood of finding significant differences. And I think really, so if you look at the CV values from our trials, most of them are really very good. And so the CV value is a reflection of the quality of the trial. And so really, as far as setting up the trial, there's really not a whole lot that we can do in the large plot situation to try to increase the likelihood of seeing those significant results. And this is something that Steve used to get a lot too in most of his trials that were of similar nature. And said very often you just don't see the results in these large plot trials, the significant differences. And oftentimes it could be just because the products aren't really giving you a benefit. So, all right, and then the next question was, so do you have an opinion on the use of the speed tubes? So that was back in the high-speed planter trial. And so I guess I don't have a comment on that at this time. And so we can maybe get back to you if you would really like to know. All right, so then to conclude here, I'd like to thank everyone who's helped to make these trials, trials and this research possible. I'd like to give a special thank you to our grower cooperators who have volunteered to have trials on their farms. And I would also like to thank our collaborators at Michigan Sugar, USDA, and at Michigan State University, as well as the University of Guelph. And I'd also like to thank Tom Wenzel, who's the research technician at Sugar Beet Advancement, for all the fantastic work that he's done this past year. All right, so I want to close by mentioning an event that's coming up here in the near future. So many of you know that we weren't able to have the Bean and Beet Symposium this year due to COVID-19. So in place of that, we are planning a sugar beet research update webinar, which will be on February 17th. That'll be starting at 9 o'clock. And so even though we can't have the in-person trade show part of the symposium, we are still going to be offering the research results portion of that. So we would invite all of you to attend, and there are going to be RUP and CCA credits available there. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Dennis to talk about weed management.
Thanks, Daniel. As I get my presentation up here, we should be going in just a second. I'm going to turn my video off again. Seems like last time in my presentation, we had a little trouble with the internet connection, and some people said it got a little, couldn't hear me, and it was getting a little laggy, so I'll be shutting my video back off here again. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank, sorry, I hit the wrong button. So before I start my presentation, I would like to thank our research department here at Michigan Sugar. They do a great job of getting these trials planted, harvested, all the treatments done, and they give us some really good data. So thanks, guys, for continuing the good work. I don't know what we'd do without you. So I'm going to talk about managing herbicides. So they continue to become more of an issue, and it's really three weeds. Mare's tail, which was probably our first widespread herbicide-resistant weed, and then water hemp and Palmer amaranth, which are both in the pigweed species. Those are becoming more widespread with higher densities and are really more difficult to control than mare's tail. So I'll talk about the control strategies for all three of these weeds. I'll give you guys some pictures and some updates with some yield on crop injury from herbicides. And then some potential new product labels for 2021 to control both specifically Palmer amaranth and water hemp and sugar beets. So really when it comes to these three weeds, prevention is the best control, and we'll probably never stop it, but we can delay its spread. And how we have to do that is by managing these weeds in all of our crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, dry beans, whatever crop you're growing, it needs to be managed in all of those. And we're going to do that through multiple herbicide modes of action in all of your crops. Using pre-emergence herbicides, whether that's corn or soybeans, and herbicides, and tank mixing those post-emergent herbicides. Really, I don't think there's very often that glyphosate should be applied alone anymore. Generally, it should probably have a tank mix with at least one other active ingredient that's effective at the weed you're trying to go after in order to preserve that technology as long as possible. So when we look at soybeans and corn, I really do believe in both of those crops that a pre-emergence followed by post is one of the best weed control strategies possible when possible, and it's going to give us the best chance to prevent and delay herbicide-resistant weeds. In wheat, husk, perfect match and wide match all do a good job controlling herbicide-resistant weeds. Perfect match and wide match are particularly good at mare's tail because they do have stinger in them, and we know stinger in sugar beets does a really good job on mare's tail. Other thing in wheat, I think fall burn down is important. You should really be controlling those escape weeds before they go to seed in the fall with a glyphosate plus 2,4-D application or a similar herbicide application. So looking at mare's tail, the issue with mare's tail in the past, it only increased number of mare's tail emerging in both the spring and summer. And that's probably why we're having more of an issue with it, in addition to it being glyphosate resistant. So I got a kind of a range of pictures here showing the growth stages of mare's tail. So its first stage after a seedling is it turns into this rosette. It can be that in the fall or in the spring, and that's really the easiest time to control. Then we start to get the stem elongation as it begins to bolt. That elongation continues until we start to flower. So that's kind of the progression of mare's tail through the growing season. A lot of times we don't even know what's in our beets if they're just scattered here and there until they get taller than the sugar beet canopy in late summer. So how do we keep mare's tail up? First, we gotta start. That can be done with tillage in the spring. So mare's tail generally responds very well to tillage. So as long as it's not really light tillage, it can sometimes squeak through that and survive. In general, a field cultivator will control mare's tail in the spring. Another option is, because we do have a lot of fields that get planted to stale seedbed, where they're not getting worked in the spring or they're having really light tillage, you can apply Liberty as a burn down. Keep in mind that it must be applied before emergence, because Liberty will kill any emerged sugar beets. The rate is 1 quart per acre, and you're going to use 8.5 pounds per 100 gallon of water of spray grade AMS with that. Most of our stinger control happens post-emergence with our glyphosate applications. Our general recommendation is to use stinger, 2 ounces followed by 4 ounces. So we would usually use 2 ounces on 2-leaf beets, 4 ounces on 4-leaf beets. A 2-ounce application generally doesn't provide good enough control, so we do need to follow that up with a 4-ounce application in order to get season long and good percent control. Looks like there's gonna be a new stinger formulation potentially for the spring and summer, Stinger HL. It's a new higher concentrated formula, so that will have a reduced application rate. So if you happen to be, during the season, if you get your stinger, pay attention if it has HL in it or not. If it does, you will need to use a reduced rate compared to the old formulation of stinger. So I want to talk a little bit about stinger applications after bolting. You know, sometimes sugar beets, well, it really doesn't, applying stinger at that time really doesn't provide adequate control. We'll get some stunting of the growing point. We'll get the growing point turning upside down. So it suppresses the weed, but it really doesn't kill it. So we really need to make sure we're getting that stinger applied when it's still in the rosette stage. What about crop injury? So I had quite a few calls this year about stinger and crop injury, and actually some other herbicides and crop injury as well. So one thing, when you apply stinger, you can get some leaf curling. Generally, it'll grow out of the injury, and we really don't see any known negative effect on yield other than you can see the visual symptoms. So on this lower picture on the left, you can see these 2 true leaves right here. I've started to curl and roll. That's a common symptom of stinger injury. And then on these little larger beets here, these are about approximately 6 to 8 leaf beets, we can see that we're getting some curling and rolling of the leaf edges here too. So it's a visual thing, but it doesn't really seem to have any negative effect on yield, and I'll get into that in a little more detail later. So what about water hemp and Palmer amaranth? Let's have a little bit of different emergence pattern. They generally emerge in late April or May, or even later in the growing season. Emergence increases as soil temperatures increase. They really don't emerge when soil temperatures are quite cold, but as we get into late April into May, that's when we'll start to see those weeds emerge. It's definitely more difficult to control than mare's tail, and really that's because of lack of herbicides in sugar beets, and I'll talk about that in some more detail. So what are our water hemp and Palmer amaranth control strategies? Really today our best options are post-emergence lay-by applications of soil residual herbicides. That includes Dual, Outlook, and Warrant. The Dual rate is 1.3 pints per acre, Outlook is 1 pint per acre, and Warrant is 3 pints per acre. All of those applications should not occur until the crop has leafed the true leaf stage or larger. Outlook needs to be completed by the 12 leaf stage, and Warrant needs to be completed by the 8 leaf stage. Well, keep in mind when you're applying these 3 products post on sugar beets, they do not control any emerged weeds. So it's really important to try to get those on as early as you can in the growing season once the crop has reached 2 leaf stage, because any water hemp or any other weeds that have emerged at the time of application will not be controlled. So when it comes to water hemp and Palmer amaranth and really trying to delay their spread, I think all fields should have at least 1 application of Dual early in the growing season. And that's really to prevent the spreading and the increased incidence of those weeds. A lot of people probably don't have on farm right now in any of their crops, but I'm seeing it more and more, whether it's in sugar beets, corn, soybeans, it's becoming more widespread, and you probably may have it and not even know it right now. So I think in general, if you have a problem or you don't know that you have those 2 weeds, you should still be applying Dual, Outlook, or Warrant at least once during the growing season. What about fields though with known water hemp or Palmer amaranth? What if we're dealing with some of those issues like we see in the lower right? Well, the first thing I think you need to do is layer residuals. That's 1.3 pints of Dual followed by 1.3 pints of Dual, 12 ounces of Outlook followed by 12 ounces of Outlook, or 3 pounds of Warrant followed by 3 pints of Warrant. Or you can do any combination of those above. You know, you can do Dual followed by Warrant, Outlook followed by Dual. But really that's probably our best control strategy that we have today for water hemp and Palmer amaranth, is to get those soil residuals on before they emerge and then continue to layer them through the season to provide season-long control. We did use some Betamix last year to control emerged water hemp. With some success, but Betamix is getting really difficult to find. It's not being manufactured anymore, so we're relying on old inventory. What about crop injury from Dual, Outlook, and Warrant? So I was on a lot of calls here of those products causing some crop injury, and some of that was due to, you know, there's a number of people that probably have never sprayed any of those products on their sugar beets before, and relying simply on Roundup for a number of years. Also, we probably forgot a little bit that how much injury we get specifically out of Dual and Outlook from the micro-rate days. You know, we were used to injury at that time and weren't too concerned. When we went to the Roundup Ready system, we eliminated all crop injury. Then we started using some of these soil residuals. We did start to see some injury again. So I want to talk about that a little bit. Dual and Outlook in particular can cause some leaf speckling. It's generally pretty minor, but you can see some speckling on the leaves. I would say Warrant tends to cause a little less injury than Dual and Outlook. How much injury you get, or if you get injury at all, is affected by a number of conditions. The weather at the time of application definitely influence how much injury there is. Adjuvants that are in the tank, whether it's more surfactant, can have an effect as well. And other products in the tank, whether that's foliar feed products or fertilizers, all those things that you add into the tank with your glyphosate plus Dual, Outlook, or Warrant applications and Stinger can really have an effect on how much injury you see. I would say in general, injury is minor and does not cause a yield loss. I'll show you some data on that. And one thing to keep in mind when you're spraying Dual, Outlook, and Warrant, you do not want a tank mixed with Quadris, and I got some pictures of that as well. So looking at the 2020 crop safety with residuals trial that our research department performed this year. So on the left, I have a picture of just Roundup applied. So that would be our check where we apply Roundup only for weed control. Then on the right is a photo of application of Roundup, Stinger, and Outlook. So I don't know how well you can see. There is a little bit of leaf injury. Some of the lower leaves have a little bit of bronzing to them, but overall it looks pretty good, pretty minimal. Really probably nothing to be concerned about. Comparing Roundup, Stinger, and Dual versus Roundup alone, pretty similar injury to Outlook. Really nothing to be concerned about, a little bit of leaf speckling, a little bit of bronzing. Looking at Roundup, Stinger, and Warrant versus Roundup alone, generally probably see a little less injury with this Warrant application, but regardless, dual outlook or warrant really don't seem to cause much visual injury most of the time, but it can vary. Looking at sugar, because we want to see if we're applying these products is causing us any yield loss. So it's looking at RWST by herbicide treatment. The first bar is Roundup alone. The second bar is Roundup applied Stinger. So they did not cause any yield loss. Roundup plus a residual. So when I say a residual, that was dual outlook and warrant. Once again, didn't cause any yield loss. Then what about Roundup plus Stinger plus a soil residual of dual outlook or warrant? Once again, didn't cause any yield. So even though sometimes we're probably seeing a little bit of leaf injury from those herbicide treatments, we really isn't causing any yield loss. Get a little closer look at some crop injury that you can see with, this was a Roundup plus Stinger plus dual plus Mustang plus surfactant. So anytime you add anything else to the tank, more additional surfactant, insecticides, especially oil products, we can see a little bit more injury. We got some leaf speckling here that was caused by that herbicide application. We're seeing some and leaf rolling here from the Stinger. So we did get some injury. In the end, this field, this was a grower's field. It still yielded well, 35.8 ton per acre, over 19% sugar and 202 pounds of RWST. So even any untreated to compare it to, it looks like it didn't have a major effect on yield if it had any effect at all. So what about when you add Quadris to that? So here we have that same tank mix of Stinger, dual, Mustang, surfactant, and Quadris. Here we got some pretty significant leaf injuries, especially on the overlapped areas of the field. You know, they got doubled up just because of sprayer lap. That's unacceptable injury. And that was just, the only difference was from the previous picture was the addition of Quadris. So in general, I would say Roundup and Quadris are usually okay together, but do not mix Roundup and Quadris with other herbicides. So what about new for 2021? I mentioned that there was potentially some new labels coming for water hemp and Palmer amaranth control. Be a dual Magnum 24C label that could potentially allow for a pre-emergence application of dual at a reduced rate. I'll talk about that in detail. The other potential label is for Ultra Blazer, a section 18, and that would be for post-emergence control of both Palmer amaranth and water hemp. I want to make a note here that both do not apply these this season unless registration is granted. And if that registration is granted, we'll send some announcements out. There'll be no question about it. But I want to give you guys some information in case it does get labeled as we head into the growing season, so you know how to potentially use these products. So the dual Magnum 24C label is for a pre-emergence application on sugar beets. So it had approximately 20 years ago, Dual did have a pre-label. That label was eventually pulled because we were seeing some reduced emergence at a full rate. And generally at that time, we were applying 1.3 pints per acre, which is the full rate of Dual. On this situation, we would be using a half a pint per acre to give us some partial control of weeds until we can get another application of Dual outlook or warrant. At this rate, we really haven't observed any reduced emergence or any other issues. So that would be the reason for the reduced rate of Dual. So looking at a dual pre-emergence trial this year, two treatments, dual pre versus untreated. There was a couple things we wanted to look at. First, we wanted to see if there was going to be any stand reduction. And if you look at beats per 100 feet, dual pre had 258 beats and the untreated had 250 beats. So there really was no reduction in stand. Sugar per acre was very similar, and so was income per acre. So it looks like that dual pre-emergence at a half a pint per acre, that reduced rate, really isn't causing any issues with either emergence or revenue per acre. So it's dual at a half a pint isn't going to provide season-long control of Palmer amaranth or water hemp, but it will give us some control until that two-leaf application of a residual can be made as a follow-up. So the question is, if you need this, the first I would say, if you're planting in late March, generally that's going to be before Palmer amaranth and water hemp will emerge, or even in early April. So maybe you really got a question if you should be doing it on those fields. But as we get into April, we probably really want to consider applying dual pre if we get the label, if we're in a known Palmer amaranth or water hemp situation. Switching gears a little bit to an Ultra Blazer Section 18 label. This would be for post-emergence applications to control water hemp and palmer amaranth. The rate would be a 1 pint per acre. Crop injury can and does occur with Ultra Blazer. And actually applications to the two-leaf beets have been shown to cause stand loss. Christy Sprague has done a lot of work on that, and she's shown that some years and some conditions, applying Ultra Blazer at the two-leaf stage can cause an actual loss in stand. You're gonna wanna apply, if we get the label, it's gonna be applied to 6-leaf beets or larger, and keep in mind that leaf burn can and does occur. You should expect some crop injury if you're gonna have to, if you need to use Ultra Blazer for palmer or water hemp treatments. So let's look a little closer at Ultra Blazer crop injury. So here's Roundup on the left. That would be our control as our standard weed treatment. On the right is Roundup plus the leaf size is less. We're seeing some browning and bronzing of the leaves through here, but definitely got some injury. Not unacceptable injury, but did see some injury from the Roundup plus Ultra Blazer. So what happens when we start to tank mix Ultra Blazer with some and Roundup plus some other herbicides? So on the left is Roundup plus Ultra Blazer. On the right is Roundup plus Ultra Blazer plus Dual. So we really aren't going to want to be mixing Dual with an Ultra Blazer application. It causes significant crop injury. It's really more injury than we can tolerate. So too much injury by addition of Dual, and a lot of it has to do with the oil content of Dual. Looking at Roundup Ultra Blazer versus Roundup Ultra Blazer Outlook. Once again, significant crop injury when we add Outlook to the Ultra Blazer application. So once again, Roundup and Ultra Blazer, if we get a label, will need to be applied alone, not with any soil residual herbicides, especially Dual and Outlook. Looking at when applied with Ultra Blazer, we see that Warrant is generally a little safer in general when applied with just Roundup, Warrant, and Stinger. That we're getting a little bit, it's a little safer, still got some injury. There's actually some of this where I thought that maybe Warrant actually safe in that Ultra Blazer a little bit by causing some antagonism. So we'll have to look at that a little more going forward, but definitely getting some injury there. So post-emergence applications of Ultra Blazer, 1 pint per acre. Do not tank mix it with Dual Magnum or Outlook, as severe crop injury can occur. Warrant looks like it's the safer tank mix right now. I would still be very cautious of mixing Warrant in with Blazer if we get that label. And in general, I would use extreme caution with adding anything to Ultra Blazer besides glyphosate. I think that's going to be one of those situations where if we get the label for Ultra Blazer and we need to apply it to a field to control water hemp or palmer amaranth, we're going to want to make that a simple application of just Roundup plus Ultra Blazer. Any other products that need to be added should be made in a separate trip. Once again, 6-leaf beets or larger, as stand loss can occur on smaller beets. And right now, this Ultra Blazer doesn't really seem to be causing any reduced yield. And if you're dealing with or water hemp and we get this label for Ultra Blazer, what choice do we really have? It's probably going to be our only post-emergent herbicide option. So to summarize, glyphosate resistant weeds, they are becoming more frequent and more widespread, unfortunately. We need to try to delay and prevent these weeds by managing them in all crops: corn, soybeans, dry beans, wheat, and really to try to protect our glyphosate technology in sugar beets. There are some potential new control options for this year. Ultra Blazer, which currently is not labeled, and Dual Magnum pre-emergence currently not labeled. Keep in mind, please don't use those products unless we get a label. It's good, and the reason we want to, looks like we're going to need some new options, and we need to really rely on those soil residuals. It's going to be 5 to 6 years before we get that next herbicide tolerant seed available for production. So do we have any questions today about any questions? Doesn't look like we have any questions right now. If you have any questions for myself, Corey, or Daniel, go ahead and you can ask those now, or feel free to contact us at another time. There are CCA credits and our credits available. Oh, you took my slide, Elizabeth. My slide's not in there. Can you, sorry, my slide's not in there. Elizabeth will bring back up the slide with the RUP credit information. When it comes for the RUP credits, because we're meeting virtually, you will need to email Jessica Carter. Her email address is on the slide. And the directions for that on the bottom. If you could have that completed by 5 o'clock tomorrow, you're gonna need to include your 7-digit, your first and your last name with the correct spelling, and then the category that you would like the credit to apply to. There is private core, commercial core, or category 1A. You can choose one of those. Commercial applicator or a private applicator. Options for this year is because of COVID is that you can have those credits applied to 2020 if you're short credits for last year, even though we're in 2021, or you can have them applied to 2021. So when you're sending that email, please include what credit year you would like that applied to. It does look like we have a couple of questions. Yeah. So the first question is, what about spraying Dual before the 2-leaf stage? If you have to do first Roundup application before then. So Dual cannot be applied before the 2-leaf stage. Dual or Outlook or Warrant. The label states that they have to be the 2-leaf stage or larger. So if you have weeds that say that are getting 1 to 2 inches tall and you want to get out there and control the emerged weeds, you're going to need to do that as a separate application and then follow that up with Dual, Outlook, or Warrant later. So yeah, do not apply Dual, Outlook, or Warrant until the beets have reached a 2-leaf stage. I have another. Super tin resistance was mentioned. Any idea of how widespread it is? So certainly super tin resistance is not that widespread yet. We're still seeing good control with super tin. We do see slight upticks in the amount of super tin resistance. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do the herbicide resistance screening this year, so we didn't get any data this year. But super tin is still working good. It's not super widespread. It's just something we really want to continue to keep an eye on going forward. Is there any other questions? So it doesn't look like any other questions right now. We will go ahead and we'll hang out here for a few. We're going to keep the slide up for you to finish jotting down details for your CCA or your RUP. You may want to take a picture of the screen right now so you have that information for later if you need it. Also, Elizabeth will be posting both our slides to the member website from today, and also a recording of this presentation will be uploaded to YouTube, and a link will be supplied on our website as well. So if there's nothing else, I thank everybody for attending today.